again, expecting that we're not going to get closure or have all the questions answered today. This is a beginning to the conversation, and your district colleagues have much more support and information planned for you coming in the near future. And so again, it's all about thinking through continuous improvement. And we wanted to make sure we got a chance to talk with you prior to summer, because we know that's when you'll really dig into your thinking and planning for the 21-22 school year. So again, as I mentioned, DPI has intentionally put equity at the center of all of this work. And so as you take a minute, just skim through the DPI definition of equity. Again, every student have access to the educational resources and rigor they need at the right moment in their education across race, gender, ethnicity, language, ability, sexual orientation, family background, and/or family income. And so we kind of keep that at the center of our work as we begin to think about our continuous improvement process. One resource that I just really appreciate that was developed by the Title I team at DPI are these mindset cards. And if you click the link on the slide, you'll find a number of cards that intentionally help us focus and center equity in all of our work. This one speaks to me for today's conversation, because what we're really doing is taking a few minutes to think through our institutional responsibility and our goals around changing our systems and practices to help all students reach their full potential and better outcomes. And so again, just take a minute to skim through that middle section of that institutional responsibility statement and pull out a few things that resonate with you. What phrase or words resonate with you? Go ahead and throw those in the chat as they pop into your mind and as you read. People over systems. Students and families don't need to fix themselves. Great points. What else is resonating? Accountability. The nature of unintended consequences. Yes. Systems and practices need fixing. Seeing ourselves as accountable to students. How are my actions colluding with my privilege? Excellent. So, and then just take a minute to also notice the guiding and coaching questions along the side. I think DPI and the Title I team's intent with these cards is that they could help in every meeting and in every conversation we have in schools and districts to bring us back to equity at the center. And so one thing that we've been doing at CESA too is trying to start every meeting we have with at least one mindset card that helps us center ourselves in equity and reflect on our purpose and our work together. And so think about how these might be useful in your school and leadership team or grade level team meetings or content area team meetings, and feel free to grab them and share them widely with people, because I do think they really help us focus before we begin. Tim?
Good afternoon, everyone. All the principals did receive an email from me, just kind of sharing out some information that was a prelude to today. And I want to give you a big picture overview of where things stand in the district, so that you know that this is not just my school, it's many schools. So here are the numbers of what things look like in the district as far as ESSA identification. Again, a reminder that this is the federal identification. And as Mary Jo will discuss, this is a ranking system. So there will always be schools at the top level, and there will always be schools at the bottom level. We just don't want to be there. I also, in this information, those schools in the district that have either non-tested grades or are for students with special characteristics like SAPAR, so or Metro, those schools have been removed since they have an alternate accountability process, which will align with this process ultimately, but right now they are not included in these numbers. So you can see the number of schools that have been identified as either TSI or ATSI, or those schools that are within 5% of the threshold. So the threshold for any identification is at the 10% lowest level in the state. And we'll talk again about what that means, what it's not for all students, but we'll just make sure that we get clarity on that. So if you're at 10% or below with specific groups, you are identified. And if you're within 5% of that, so within the lowest 15%, you are also close, but you're not identified officially. So total in the district, we have approximately 80% of our schools are either identified or within the threshold, close. So that kind of gives you a big picture of we're in this together, and we're trying to make a change, as Dr. Pryor said. So back to you.
So we did want to share a little bit about IDEA identifications versus ESSA identifications. So Julie, did you want to talk just a little bit about IDEA first for us?
Sure. The reason that it's relevant to discuss IDEA along with ESSA is that for most districts across the state, we're looking at the same student groups and that are identified under each category. So there are annual cycles of identification for all states that receive funding through the federal government under the Individual with Disabilities Education Act. And there are different indicators that are used, different pieces of specific data that are used to identify schools or districts that are not meeting the compliance standards or the requirements under each area. So under IDEA, we have LEA determinations, and those are based on 17 different indicators. We also have IDEA or racial equity that is identified. And these are district level identifications. And currently Madison, along with many other schools across around the state, are identified under both IDEA and under the area of racial equity.
So again, the IDEA identifications happen at the district level. So in an accumulation of all the district data, those determinations are made. ESSA is different. ESSA looks at your state test data by school level. And so you can see below that there are targeted support schools, and then there are additional targeted support schools in Madison. There's also an identification called comprehensive support. There are no schools in Madison who are in that comprehensive support category at this time. And so we're going to take you in a little deeper to explain the how and the why of all of this.
So IDEA looks for racial disproportionality, and it's solely based on a collection of or an examination of data. It doesn't look at policies, procedures, practices that are used at the school level. And they look at the student population, and they look for over-identification of certain racial groups in special education. And specifically, they're looking for students that are twice as likely or greater to be identified as a student with a disability or identified as a student with a disability in a particular category, such as emotional behavioral disability or specific learning disability. They also look for placement. So they look to see are certain student racial groups disproportionately placed in more restrictive educational settings. And they also look at discipline. And for discipline, they look at both the incidence, the duration, and the type of discipline that occurs. Smaller districts oftentimes are not identified. The larger districts more often are, because they do have certain cell group size requirements that some of our smaller districts do not have. If a district is identified, such as Madison, with a disproportionality, there's a requirement to set aside what they call CESA funds that must be spent toward addressing the root cause of the disproportionality. And the district at the district level is required to submit an improvement plan into WISE grants and submit that to DPI, and then to track and flag students that are recipients of this funding. So Madison currently is identified both for discipline, placement, as well as identification. And those are the areas that would need to be addressed then through the continuous improvement work. IDEA or LEA determinations are again based on those different indicators that look at things such as the compliance pieces. Are we completing evaluations in a timely fashion? Are preschool students being transitioned from birth to 3 to school programs in a timely way? There's also a component which looks at results indicators, and those would be graduation rates, dropout rates, math and reading proficiency, test participation, and educational environments for students with IEPs. After a district has been identified for 2 or more years, they are required to develop a continuous improvement plan and to continue to work to address those specific areas that are found to be discrepant from what is required by the federal government for the performance indicators that are listed. Oh, Marcia, you're muted.
Yeah. And going back to ESSA then, again, it looks at your forward and ACT data. It is a calculation of achievement, graduation rate, attendance, and progress for ELs with access data. So using your access data. So basically all of your state testing data gets put into the calculation. And like Tim was saying, basically what the state does is takes that calculation, and in each student subgroup, schools that have at least 20 students in the subgroup kind of get put into a line, and the state draws a line at the 10% performance spot, and that's schools that are at or below 10% performance get the TSI or targeted support identification, and they draw another line at 5%, and schools that are at 5% or below get an ATSI identification. And those identifications are by subgroup, right? So you might be identified in just one subgroup as a school, or you might have multiple subgroup identifications as a school. So there is some overlap, but again, the test participation is a significant component of this calculation. And Tim, did you want to say something to that effect?
Yes, yes, I did. And the first thing that comes to mind when you think about test participation is our most recent experience with the forward and the ACT and access, which is, we know, not at all typical. So just to put your mind at ease, the state has received a waiver so that this year, 2021, is not included in the ESSA identification. Also, 1920 was not included in that ESSA identification because, again, we did not have forward test results. So that being said, we need to go back to the 18-19 school academic year in order to get information about the assessment. That's the data that was used. I do want to point out a difference between the state accountability report cards and the federal accountability identification. Both of those groups say you must test at least 95% of all students and of students within each one of these student groups. The state has come to the conclusion that they are not going to penalize directly schools or districts that do not hit that 95% mark. Those of you who've been principals for a while, remember back several years ago, there was a point removal. They took away points from schools if you did not hit the participation level. However, the federal legislation handles this differently. If you do, let's just say you had 100 students in a specific group and you were supposed to test 95 of those, at least 95 of those students. Suppose that due to opt-outs, you only had 80 students take the test. In the state, that wouldn't make any calculation difference, but the feds will say the difference between the 80 who took that and the required 95, which are 15 students, we're going to assign those untested students zeros. So for points, when it comes to calculating the achievement, they get zeros. So suddenly you now have 95 students or 95 scores that are being used, but 15 of those right out of the gate are zeros. So fortunately, this year we did not have to deal with this particular piece. But if we go back and look at how many opt-outs we had in 2018 and 2019, we, compared to this year, had a drop in the bucket, but it was still significant. Overall, in 2018, 2019, we had 450 students district-wide. About 150 were in elementary, spread over about 7 or 8 different elementary schools, and about 250 were spread out over the middle schools, specifically about 2 or 3 different middle schools. So when we are looking at the 2018-19 data, yes, there were opt-outs. Yes, it does play a role. But please keep in mind that this current year's data is not a part of that particular piece. And I'm sure there will be questions, and we'll be taking a look at that in more depth a little bit later.
So I was getting a strange warning on my computer screen. So I was asking Julie if she could do the slide share instead. So that's what the quick switch was here. But this slide just shares with you the exit criteria. These are the first 2 exit criteria. We have one more that will come later. But basically it's get out of that bottom 5 or 10% spot, right? So whatever we can do to increase student achievement so that we no longer land in that bottom 10 or 5% category is the way to get no longer in the identification category. Now, TSI is a re-identification every year when the testing is officially being counted. This year's data is not officially being counted. So for TSI identifications, I think the summer of 22 will be likely the first year when you have the potential to exit identification. So the data from next spring. ATSI identifications, ATSI is a 3-year identification. And so that DPI has said, as long as we have a relatively, what we can call normal school year next year, summer of 2023 will be the first opportunity to exit from ATSI identifications. So then, and also the school must demonstrate a sustained progress toward long-term goals. And we'll share a little bit more about the goals in a bit, but specifically around student achievement, student growth, graduation rate, attendance rate, and your EL proficiency growth data. And Tim, you were going to share a little bit about the website?
Yes, so I am going to jump in, and I think, Julie, I'm going to jump over your screen sharing. So let me share that, and I will get to the website in just a moment. Okay, so on the district assessment website, if you go here, towards the bottom, I've added the state and federal accountability information. You will have to log in, but it will look something like this. On the left-hand side will be the updated and any incoming information on state accountability. So the state report cards, which are in the process of changing. So we can talk about that at a different date. On the right-hand side is the federal accountability. So there are a few pieces, there are pages here on taking you into further greater depth for understanding the identification, what must be done to exit, what does threshold mean, because we're going to be throwing that term around, and then what does long-term improvement look like. But for you individually, you will be able to go and take a look at your school's data specifically. So if I click on elementary schools, that will take me in and I'll be able to see all the elementary schools. You have access to your school only. In each folder is information about the understanding the identification, an overview of the accountability in the district. If you have received an identification, what is your progress towards exit, and what does this specifically mean for your school, as well as a rubric called the continuous improvement process rubric if you've been identified. So there's a lot of information in here. This is available. It is behind the staff only, so you will have to log in, but that is here as well. We'll also be adding information about IDEA and what this means for the district. And since we're all part of the whole, what this means for you as schools and how this all meshes together. So that finally on the left-hand side is what's the difference between state and federal accountability. So there's a crosswalk document, as well as, I'm sorry, it's kind of long, 17 minutes of me trying to explain what the difference is. So, all right, I'll hand this back to you.
So on the next slide, then, if Julie, are you going to pull those up? The next slide is just a little bit more detail around the requirements for ATSI and TSI identification. And so it goes into some specific bulleted points that are a part of what DPI is asking for from ATSI and TSI identified schools. So each school with a TSI or ATSI identification must have a continuous improvement plan. And the plan must have an evidence-based strategy or practice or program that is being implemented and is connected specifically to the root cause of, or what your root cause has been identified as for the gaps that you have, or the discrepancies or the identification that you have. So that's a part of the process that you all will be working on as a district in your continuous improvement efforts this summer. And that's part of why we wanted to make sure we shared this information with you prior to your summer work dates. There's another piece called a resource inequity audit, and Tim can share those. There are school level resource documents in SAFE, which is a part of WISE grants. And Tim can share those resources with you so that you can take a look at which resources the state has found and compare some data there, as well as thinking about other pieces of data that could come into play, or other bits of information that might be considerations in your district to school conversations around budgeting and ensuring enough support for your schools to actually implement the continuous improvement efforts that you're taking on.
I
The other-
will, I
Oh, go
will
ahead.
put those, I'll put those documents into those folders that I just shared, showed people. So they will have their own school's document in those folders.
Thank you, Tim. And then the other piece that's really critical to ESSA work or your ESSA identifications is around stakeholder engagement and really intentionally connecting with the family and community, the families and communities, especially those that may be underserved in our traditional legacy systems, right? So if your identifications are in your students with IEPs group, how are you intentionally engaging and connecting with the families of your students with IEPs in order to ensure that their voices are being heard during your continuous improvement process planning and during your implementation process across the school year? And so thinking through, where are my identifications and how am I intentionally engaging those stakeholders to ensure that they have a voice and that their voice matters in the improvement process is really what the continuous improvement process is nudging on here from ESSA. And Dr. Pryor, did you want to share a few more things about the MMSD school improvement process?
Yes, I just want the team to know, and I know a lot of flags probably raised when we lifted the fact that it requires an improvement plan. We've worked side by side with Mary Jo and the team, and you will not have to do an additional plan. We're doing that work on our end to incorporate the components that are required in our SIP 2.0, and you will hear more about this at our meetings that are scheduled on the 22nd and the 23rd, and we will be able to roll that piece out. But I also want to just lean in and say this to the team right now with everything that we've heard. And I get it. I know anxiety is probably high in regards to this, but this is nothing more than becoming more intentional about how we do teaching and learning, making sure that our SIP is a living document that guide our steps with checkpoints along the way. And I am confident, very confident, number one, that we have the right people on the bus and in the right seats, and that's you all that's out there. And I'm confident that we have the talent to lift this identification. I know that we can do it. If we continue to move towards our trajectory of becoming on grade level standard as far as teaching and learning, we have a solid scoping sequence, and we have our assessments along the way. I can guarantee you that we're going to see great results at the end. So again, I don't want you to have anxiety about this. It's just a process. And I know that this is the work that we've been talking about all along. So, I'm excited about the work. And so I just wanted to lift that. So just know that it's not going to require an additional document. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pryor. We do want to give you a few seconds to just process everything that you've heard so far. Jot any questions down. If you have questions that you're hoping to get answered at the end of our presentation, please pop them in the chat now. And Jen and Tim will be watching for those and pulling them together for us so that we can answer them when we wrap up. Know that we will be going into next, what is an evidence-based improvement strategy, specifically based on ESSA ruling and IDEA. We'll talk a little bit about some of the system supports that CESA 2 can provide MMSD. And then we will also share the continuous improvement rubric that DPI has designed to support your process. So again, I'm going to pause for a minute. Any questions that you would like to pose, feel free to place those in the chat. Practicing my wait time to give you time to type. Okay, well, we'll move forward. And if anything comes up, please feel free to continue to add questions to the chat so that we can answer them when we get to the end of the slides. So I did want to share a little bit about what ESSA and IDEA require around this evidence-based improvement strategy aligned to your root cause and theory of action, right? So evidence-based improvement strategies don't have to be a program that you buy. It can be just really high quality strategies or practices that can impact student learning, right? But there must be solid evidence to show that they produce results and will improve student achievement. Remembering that these are the measure of this progress is your test data, right? So they are more academic in nature. But if you can click to the next slide, it takes us a little bit deeper. So when you're thinking about what your evidence-based improvement strategy might be for your school, think about 3 specific characteristics. Does it target the identified need and the root cause, or what your team has analyzed to find the root cause of some of the gaps that we're noticing in the data? Is it backed by solid evidence or research studies? And this is the tricky one, right? And we'll talk a little bit more about this. But again, think what works clearinghouse kind of evidence, right? And I'll take you in a little deeper in just a minute. But then number 3 is a really critical contextual one. Is this evidence-based strategy something that's teachable, learnable, and doable in your school's context? Right? So think about who is on your team, what seems to be a good fit for your team, and how will you get it done? What's the implementation plan for making it happen in your school? Because there's no point in selecting a practice if there's no plan for getting it implemented. So if we can go to the next slide, then this will take you a little bit deeper. So ESSA requires tiers, at least tier 3, preferably tier 2 evidence in those evidence-based strategies. So tier 3 promising practice means there are correlational studies showing that that strategy or practice has had a positive impact on student learning. Best practice would be if the study shows a positive impact on student learning in the specific student groups where you've been identified. ESSA requires at least 3 studies of at least 300 students each in that evidence-based. All right. Next step up, tier 2 moderate evidence, is quasi-experimental studies, meaning there's a control group involved as well. I put a number of links on the slide so that if you want to dive into this more, you can dig in and find some more information on it. The slide in the lower left-hand corner, that slide deck is from DPI, and it takes you in much deeper to what quasi-experimental and correlational studies means. The WiseLearn link is a collection of evidence-based improvement strategies that DPI has pulled together for you to peruse. And then the source at the bottom is the non-regulatory guidance from USDE that details these evidence level requirements for ESSA. So we can go to the next slide. And this is just one example of a place that you might look. Right? So what I have linked under the factors influencing student achievement is the meta-analysis data from John Hattie in Visible Learning, if you've heard of John Hattie's effect sizes, right? And I just pulled a few out that I know your district has already invested time and energy into. So one of the highest rated effect size actions is collective teacher efficacy. Right? So how are your teachers pulling together as a team and working collaboratively to make things happen in your school. Super big effect size on learning. And that meta-analysis means multiple studies finding the same results, right? That this has a giant impact on student learning when teachers are working as a collaborative team. Another one, the next one down in the list, is teacher estimates of student achievement. So again, thinking about all the work you've done around Black excellence and teacher mindset and unintended bias and courageous conversations, all of that work is part of that goal of teachers' mindsets around what students are capable of doing. And if we can get our teachers all with that believable, that I believe in you sort of attitude, and you're all our kids attitude, much more likely for student achievement to go up. And then this final one, this cognitive task analysis, again, this is just, some people might use the term rigor here, but not rigor as in loading on lots of work, but rigor as in really deep cognitive activity for our students, decision-making, problem solving, making judgments, critical literacy kinds of work. Right. And so these are 3 high effect size practices that have a lot of evidence behind them that might be good examples of the kinds of things you might want to really focus on in your improvement plans. Not the only ones, not in isolation, but possibilities out there. So this is our final exit criteria slide. And Julie, I'm going to ask you to pop open the link to the continuous improvement rubric. So this is a tool that DPI has designed to guide your continuous improvement process. And Tim and your district leaders are using this tool to help them design the process that they'll be sharing with you later. But I just want to give you a chance to navigate it a little bit and get familiar with it, because I do think it's a really powerful tool. So it's organized as a rubric with the components of the Plan, Do, Study, Act cycle, right? Like the continuous improvement cycle. There's a readiness component, and then you'll see Plan, Do, Study, Check, and Act built into the rubric. And then Julie, if we can go down to the dots page, page 6. So page 6 kind of is sort of your key to reading the rubric. And what you'll notice are at the top of each descriptor is there are a bunch of dots. The dots that are for targeted or additional targeted assistance schools are the kind of green with the T in the middle. Those identify pieces of your improvement plan that are requirements for targeted, additional targeted and targeted assistance schools. So those are ones you might want to pay special attention to as you're navigating your continuous improvement process. Also note that the D, the aqua blue D, is specifically around racial disproportionality, which is a district-wide identification. And then the purplish N is your needs intervention for IDEA, which is another district-wide identification. So all schools would want to take a closer look at those 2. And then Julie, if we can just go down to that R7, I'll just want to give you a minute to see what this looks like. So again, you can see here that in each category, there are indicators that describe the practices that are happening around continuous improvement. And R7 is a readiness indicator, meaning your district and your school teams have systems and processes in place to use data. So how is it that you're using data day to day, month to month across the year to inform your continuous improvement process? And if you read into the accomplished level, then you can see that it gets pretty specific around the kinds of data and the ways the data should be used. So we're looking at data points that will benefit educator practice, right? Focus on students and students who have not benefited from educator practice up to this point as much as others, and thinking through what data that might be that could inform that. And then also notice teams working toward connecting data with content standards, learning targets, and other student outcomes. So what might that look like in your continuous improvement process? How can we really zoom in on and start focusing on the teaching and learning, the content standards, the learning targets, and the student outcomes in an ongoing way, rather than just when our state test data comes in, right? Because what we want to do is be able to notice and celebrate the little successes along the way to build that collective teacher efficacy and those teacher estimates of student achievement, right? When they start believing that they can have a positive impact, it's much more likely that they will jump in and believe and work even harder to make this all happen. So if we can slide down to the D, 2, and 3 then, Julie, these are the last two that I'll take you into before we move on. So D2 is specific to data, and I like to call it out to districts and schools because I think it might be different from what is typically happening in many schools and districts. And you'll see this one has a green T by it. It says, team ensures implementation of the plan with fidelity. And then notice down in the accomplished area, which is our target goal from DPI, we're trying to get between 51 and 89% implementation of that evidence-based practice. So how might we build our plans and think through our processes in our schools so that we can collect and ensure and build on that fidelity of implementation? Because in the end, equity is really about all students getting access to high quality instruction. And how do we do that if we don't know that we have fidelity of implementation in every classroom, right? No matter which 4th grade or 8th grade classroom my student is in, I can be assured that they're getting access to this really high quality instruction and curriculum. And so that's the fidelity piece. If we can go down to D3, there's one more piece that I do think is, I mean, I know that you all are likely doing some of this, but again, zooming in on that adult practice data, there've really been quite a few studies showing that when we get into the classrooms and we use adult practice data to inform our continuous improvement process, we can make dramatic improvements in student outcomes. And so thinking through, what is my evidence-based improvement strategy? And what adult practice data might I collect and use to inform that process on a monthly or bi-monthly basis so that I can share out the improvements that we're making and we can celebrate the growth that we're making across the year. And it can inform our professional development and our coaching cycles, right? Because now we know we're at about 30% fidelity of implementation with this practice. Let's see if we can bump it up to 40 for next month, and then do some PD, do some coaching cycles, and really build teacher skills so that teachers feel supported and know that you have their backs in getting this done and making this happen for the students. So again, this continuous improvement rubric is meant to support you in developing a really highly effective continuous improvement process. And Tim and your district team are using it to build your district continuous improvement process. It's a lot of information all at once. Please grab the link and save it to your desktop so that you can peruse it at your leisure. But again, the end game goal here, one more. The end game goal here is that whatever you decide you're going to really focus on in your school, we want to then, rather than doing a few pieces of PD and giving it out to the teachers and hoping that it gets implemented, what we really want to do is build the systems and supports and build the continuous improvement growth mindset so that we can make it happen. Because what the evidence is showing us is that if we let it happen, if we do a little bit of PD and hand it out and hope for the best, in 17 years, we might get to 14% of implementation across classrooms. But if we really intentionally build our plans, within about 3 years, we can get to that 80% implementation, and students are more likely to benefit from evidence-based practices that actually get implemented with equity across all classrooms. And so that's really what our goal is here. All right, and this slide is basically just some resources for additional information, some DPI websites with lots of resources and supports on it. A couple of studies down below that speak to some of the processes and practices that are built into the continuous improvement rubric, and a quick data collection form that we at CESA 2 would really appreciate a few minutes of your time to jump into and fill out. So I'm going to pause there and check in with district people. Would we like to give people a few minutes to fill out the survey, or are we headed into our next steps? Question and answer.
I think we can send this link out to everyone so that we can go and finish up, and then I'll make sure that we send it out to everybody.
Awesome. Thank you, Tim.
I'm also wondering if perhaps there aren't any questions that folks have at this point before we go on to next steps.
Feel free to unmute and share questions, or if Tim or Jennifer, if you saw some in the chat earlier that you'd like to read off.
Yep, we had one in the chat earlier, and the question was, when can we find information about the ESSA rankings for all schools so that we know how to get out of the threshold? So we will send out an answer to this question. There is a site on the DPI website where you can find a more detailed report regarding the identification and where you fell against other schools across the state.
Right. I think it might be the third link down on the resource page. Check into that DPI federal identifications website. Yep. Right. And I just saw one come in just to clarify, it's your SIP process. Yes. Tim and the district team are working to build this process right into the SIP process that you'll be engaging in. Correct, Jennifer?
Yes, that is my understanding. And Jackie had a second question. When will we receive additional guidance on the required strategies aligned with literacy?
Right. And so I know that there will be more information coming at your continuous improvement days on June 22nd and 23rd to support that. And also know that part of our CESA 2's work with DPI is to be available to identified schools and districts to support your efforts in this area. So feel free to reach out and ask for our support or our next step ideas as well. We're happy to be a thought partner, a brainstorming partner, or a support in any way we can. Any other questions in the chat, or if anyone wants to unmute?
Okay, I was trying to give everyone some time to kind of digest and see whether or not there were going to be any questions posed. If not, I know we're coming to the end of this presentation. What I would recommend to the team is this. It's been a lot of information. I would go back for our next steps, digest what was shared today, get with your leadership team, discuss it, and let it settle in first, because as you receive this information, it probably seems like it's a lot of work to be done, which it is. There's a lot of work need to be done, but it is the work that we're engaged in every year. We just need to now focus our work. It's as simple as that. And many of you are doing a great job. I've seen plenty of plans that we have in place for the upcoming year. So on this side of the house, the team is, again, working diligently to build out our school improvement plan. that we will share with you, and we know we will have all the components embedded therein. You can begin to start really diving into the data from the year 1819. That's the data that we will utilize to establish baselines. It makes all the sense in the world. I would ask that you start digging into that and looking for root causes, a root cause for the population of students or the subgroups that are targeted here in this report, and then start trying to derive at possible solutions for that. And again, these strategies and interventions that you are going to roll out, as they stated earlier, they have to be proven best practices. They can't just something that we pull off the shelf, but they have to be proven best practices. And so I will work with the team, and we will also gather a list of best practices that you could probably peruse and gather some ideas as well, but work with your team around that piece. I want to thank Mary Jo and Julie for coming today, sharing with us. They will be at our disposal if we have additional questions. A special thank you to Jennifer and Tim. They have been stellar in this work. They have really kept us grounded and kept us informed along the way, and they will continue to be here for us. And I definitely want to give a public thank you to all of them. And again, I cannot emphasize enough, this is not a solo walk. This is a joint walk. We're in this together. And, you know, we had to just face the brutal facts. It doesn't feel good. And if it feels good to you, you know, then we got to have another conversation. It doesn't feel good, but, you know, we own it. And, you know, we're the ones that can do something about this. And I think it rests in this realm of being intentional about what we do. And as they were sharing today, I was just thinking, you know, systems of practice, support systems in place for students who were not successful first go around, then a monitoring system, and then assessing students' work, assessing students so that we can utilize the data from these assessments to make informed decisions of the shifts perhaps that we have to make in ensuring that we're really intentionally educating every child. One of the other things that I want to lean in to, which is very, very important, this idea of a test out culture, you can see the impact of that for those of you that, you know, have a large percent of students opting out. It is a conversation that we have to have with our parents in regards to the value of these assessments. And we'll have more conversations in regards to that. So again, with that said, I thank you for your time today. I'm not sure if Dr. Jenkins is here to close it out, or if Lisa would like to add any closing commentary, or anyone else. We will conclude this presentation if you don't have any other commentary left.
Julie, there was one last slide that's next steps for MMSD that I'm not sure if Dr. Pryor wants to talk to. Could you pull up slide, let's see, what number is it? One more forward, yep. Thank you, Julie.
Mm-hmm.
Did we say all that already?
That will be used.
So I can sort of review this, Marvin. This has been on my mind as I'm also working with the school board for this. As Dr. Pryor talked about principals, I know you're thinking about this and will be planning to review this data with your school-based leadership teams. And then, as Dr. Pryor had said, it will be used to inform the next steps in your school improvement plans. A version of this presentation will be shared with the Board of Education on Monday at the instructional work group meeting. I'm actually prepping them for that meeting right after this. And the assessments for learning piece for the next school year. So we will be sharing some resources and be sharing some formative assessments and standardized, really standards aligned formative and interim assessments next year. So we'll be discussing those so that we can have a baseline for school improvement plans and ongoing improvement. And Kaylee will be sharing those with principals right after this meeting. So that's what that last bullet refers to. But just wanted you to know, we will be sharing this with the Board of Education, and they will be receiving essentially the same information that you did today. Dr. Pryor, was there anything else you wanted to say before we close out?
Think that about just about covers everything. The only other thing that we'll probably be doing is the chiefs, making the chiefs available to our principals to answer questions that you may have beyond this meeting right here. And so we'll see if we can get something on the calendar in a few days so that you can have further conversation about this. But other than that, that's it. We have some work to do. Let's get ready to do it.
Thank you all again. It was nice to see some familiar faces out there. I hope you're all doing well and enjoy your summer.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.